We have a very special guest here who now we do have him signed in. And Dr. Ron Paul is a former 12-term congressman and candidate for President of the United States and physician. He is also the nation's leading voice for limited government, individual liberty, and sound money. Since leaving Congress in 2013, Dr. Paul has kept busy with the Campaign for Liberty, the Ron Paul Institute, and his daily online Liberty Report. And I know we said very little. We could go on for an hour, but we'd rather listen to you. Welcome, Dr. Ron Paul. We appreciate you being here.
Mr. Chairman and panel, I want to thank you very much for the opportunity to come here to visit, because I consider what you're doing is very important, not only for your state and for the issue of money, but for an understanding about some of our problems in this country. And it's an issue that I have worked on for a long time. Matter of fact, it was in 1971 when we sort of deserted all monetary sense with the breakdown of the Bretton Woods and just separating the dollar completely from gold is when I got interested in talking about economic policy. So I'm delighted to be able to come here and visit with you a bit, and I really want to congratulate you for this, because I think of this in a couple terms. You know, in Washington, one of my biggest complaints in Washington was the complaint with Congress. I was a member, but I was complaining because they were always delivering the prerogatives, the responsibilities to somebody else, to the bureaucrats, to international organization, and they would give it to the executive branch, and they never accepted their responsibility. On the monetary issues, the states are talked about in the Constitution, and they have restrictions. They can't print money, but they also have been told in the Constitution that they can only use gold and silver as legal tender. So the responsibility is on the states to follow the rules, and that meant nobody was supposed to use anything other than silver, gold, and gold as legal tender. But we've had a mess. It's gotten worse. It started in 1913. There was a sort of a climactic end in 1971, but the problems have continued, and if you look at some of the charts, things have been really rocky since 71. With the destruction of the value of the money. Since 1971, we've lost 95% of the value of the dollar. And the tragedy there is that the average person, the middle class, gets wiped out. Austrian economics teaches that if you destroy the currency, you will destroy the middle class. And people who will get the money that the government prints, which they shouldn't be allowed to do, goes into the pockets of the bankers and the corporations. And when the people get the money, their prices go up, and they wonder why they're getting behind. Well, my wages went up $5, $10. No, they need to be $15, but they're looking in the wrong place. It's the monetary issue, and that it is the real problem. So what you're doing here, the way I understand it, is you're suggesting that maybe we ought not to tax money. And I think that's a good idea, because I'd like to not tax a lot of things, but certainly it makes no sense to tax money. And that is what I understand you're trying to stop, because if you have currency transactions across the world, they don't measure the value of the dollar. Oh, your dollar value went up, so we're going to tax you on the increase of your value. So no, you don't get taxed for that. So the tax issue has been used. Matter of fact, the very early history was they used the tax issue to more or less justify the Second National Bank, which got us off on the wrong track because they called it a tax issue rather than a monetary issue. But very explicitly, the Congress is allowed to coin money. One time in a banking committee hearing, they were arguing the case that in the Constitution they were given the authority to print money at will, and I wrote in my dissenting view that show me. It says you're not allowed to coin money, but that's how. But they just did that. They came to believe that they had the authority to print money. They don't have the authority to print money, and the states can only use silver and gold as legal tender. And in Article 10, where they mention that you can only use gold and silver, the very next sentence is you can't counterfeit the securities or the coin of the United States. And I often wondered if we'd have ever enforced the law of the 1792, the very first Coinage Act, it said that anybody that did commit counterfeit could get the death penalty. And I often thought, boy, I don't know if they'll ever get around to enforcing that. That'd be a lot of problems. But that's how seriously they felt about this, because they had the runaway inflation with the continental dollar, and subsequently they tried to keep the central banks out. Jefferson got rid of the first central bank, and Jackson got rid of the second national bank, and we're waiting on the third one to fall. But it's the issue of money, and I think this tax issue is very important. I like the idea of competing currencies, and in my ideas about getting back to normal, you probably can't turn a switch under today's conditions and say, well, tomorrow it's going to be like the old days. It doesn't work. But you could move gradually back if you have competing currencies. So I've often introduced legislation for competing currencies, and what you're doing here would be very helpful. It would be legalizing competition in a constitutional fashion. It isn't like saying, okay, Arizona wants to print their paper currency again, because you're not allowed to do that, but you're allowed to try to make it competitive. And I think this is very important. I think it's important for what you're doing. It's an important issue. It could help your state, and there's a lot of benefits. But to me, since I'm in the education business as much as the political business, I think what you're doing here is just great. I think if this passes, people are going to know about this. Other states are already involved. There's going to be a lot more. So this is where the responsibility of government ought to be. I like the idea to come to a state legislative body, because I think the authority should be here with the states, not at the federal level. Their job is to mess things up. And our job, your job at the state level, is to try to clean up the mess. But this would be historic, and it'll be noticed. It'll be a good step in the right direction. And I am very pleased with what's been happening, because in the 1970s, I was motivated by the breakdown of the gold standard in 1971. If anybody remembers the 70s, we had interest rates at 21%, inflation rate of 15%, and I thought the monetary issue was important, because it is the monetary debasement that allows governments, federal governments, to spend more money than they have, and they print it. Then they can have a welfare warfare state and no responsibility. So that's what fascinated me about the monetary issue. And I think that there'll come a day when it's absolutely necessary that we do it. Conditions will get so bad, so the more understanding there is. I am always delighted when so many young people are interested in this issue, because many young people will be inheriting this problem and trying to sort it out. But it's really not too difficult. It isn't something because Ron Paul likes the gold standard. Believe me, the gold standard was invented a long, long time ago, from the beginning of recorded history. 5,000 years ago, they used gold and silver. Biblically, gold and silver, real weights and measures. That's what they counted by. So this is not brand new. It's the governments and the people who seek power are always undermining the restraints placed on governments by honest money. So I congratulate you for hearing and dealing with this bill, because I think if you do pass this bill, it will be a great step forward for a lot of people to understand the money issue and the freedom issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Paul. Before you leave the podium, members, are there questions for Dr. Paul? Senator Farley, now be nice.
I'm always nice, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Congressman, for being here, and thank you for your service, your lifetime of service. I really respect your commitment. I also, as a graphic designer, really loved your Revolution logo. I thought that was brilliant. I'm trying to wrap my mind around how this isn't simply another tax giveaway to people who are coin collectors. The problem I see is that I get your point about you don't tax money when you exchange money for money. And I would buy that if the $20 gold piece from 1850 was going to be traded for a $20 bill. Then you don't tax that. Because that's what happens when you got a gold coin that says a face value of $20. It should be worth $20. It's always worth $20. When you got a $20 bill that's worth $20, it's always worth $20. when you actually trade money, paper money, no one gives you less because it's all balled up and torn and all the rest of it. But if you trade a $20 gold coin for money, then you get a lot less if it's in bad shape. To me, the value of a gold coin, silver coin, all the rest of that stuff is worth based on a combination of how much of the precious metal is in it, what combination, what condition it's in, and whether or not there's a big market for that particular coin. So it becomes more of a collector thing. So to give someone a capital gains tax break on the money they make in money that you would call dishonest money from selling that coin seems like just simply a tax giveaway that other people will be paying for because we're going to need to get enough money to pay for our roads and schools anyway.
Well, I think of it as returning some real value that somebody accumulated because what they bought increased in value. But you say if you have a $20 gold piece, you turn it for $20, there should not be a tax. Probably wouldn't be. But what if you turn in your $20 gold piece and you get $150? The government said because the value of the dollar goes down, they're taxing inflation. So that's very unfair. And numismatic coins also go up not only because they're old, and there will always be numismatic values going up, which people should be rewarded for because they have studied it and pick and choose the coins. But if a numismatic coin goes up and is very expensive, that's one of the first places people go to try to protect themselves against the debasement of currency. So that value, once again, it's inflation. You're taxing inflation. And everything that goes up, this is why they have to adjust the tax code, because if you go up to the next bracket, you pay a higher tax and this sort of thing. It's so unfair not to have a standard of value. By not having this standard of value, which is so important, is sort of trying to build a building with a ruler that's always changing value. So you want something that you can always define, and that's why gold and silver 5,000 years ago was used as a standard, and it's established as a sound value, and why paper money always fails. So I think what you want is honesty and standards, and I think it takes care of this business of things going up in value, and why shouldn't they pay taxes on it? Well, why does the government need the money is the big question. They don't need the amount of money they're taking anyway. But I imagine that there's not a whole lot of taxes involved in numismatic coins, but I don't know. I've never looked at that figure. But I would, I think that's what you're talking about is you're taxing inflation. So the more you inflate, if you get 20 $20 bills or something, the government's going to get more money, by doing this.
Mr.
Thank
Chair,
you.
Thank you very much.
Chair, Congressman Paul. Just a
Senator Farley, I guess Senator Farley has one more question for you, if you don't mind.
Thank you, sir. I guess there's a lot of places where people can decide to invest their money as a hedge against inflation.
Right.
That's why we invest money. You can invest it in stocks. You can invest it in the real estate, your house, a lot of other things. And that also goes way up in value over time, and that represents in at least some part inflation. But that people will be taxed on capital gains for that stuff. This bill will only exempt from capital gains the collection of the sale of gold and silver coins. So to me, that's picking winners and losers. The people who decide to invest in gold and silver coins won't be taxed. The people who decide to invest in the stock market or real estate will be taxed.
Yeah, I understand your point, but the important point is stocks are not money, and gold and silver is money. Money is different than stocks and bonds, and money's been different. And you shouldn't have to tax money, just because of you have to defend that the fact if this year, the dollar goes up and down, it went up 20% in the last year or so. So the dollars that you kept in your suitcase at home all of a sudden went up 20%. You want the government to come in and say, my paper money went up 20%, so I have to pay capital gains tax on it? No, you want everybody to be treated equally. And actually, paper, Federal Reserve, is just not money. It's a substitute for money, and it's fraud. And they're really messing up the people by using the tax code to tax this fraudulent money where there shouldn't be a tax at all. And this is the reason reason why it has to be treated as money. You have to understand the issue of money, and money should be exempt from taxation. Like you said, the dollar may be very stable, in value. It's the other half that's at fault, and that's where the other half is getting taxed. And it's not very fair to the people, or it's not fair to the Constitution. It's not fair to the founders. It's not fair to those who have warned us. The founders knew about the runaway inflation of the Continental money, and they say they had a vote in the Continental Congress to allow Congress to print money. And it was defeated. They don't want people printing money. And here we have a tax code all based on accumulating more money for the government through this tax code. And you say, well, we won't have enough money to do these good things that we're going to do. Well, tax people more honestly, tax people outrightly. Then maybe if we had to pay for our bills, maybe we'd be less involved overseas. Maybe we would have a smaller welfare state, and maybe we wouldn't, but people would have to pay. So this is very deceitful, what's happening. It's a hidden tax, and inflation is a tax. So this is the reason the monetary issue is so important to me, because ultimately, if you want to protect liberty and the size of government, you have to have honest money.
Thank you very much, Dr. Paul. We appreciate that. Senator Borelli has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Dr. Paul, welcome. And I'm glad to finally have met you. So, would you agree that when in 1971, when President Nixon, when we went off the gold, so this actually might help convince Senator Farley on this one. When President Nixon took us off the gold standard in '71, the price of gold was at It was at $35, and then in 1980. But in 10 years, it was up at 800. So would you agree that this was government-induced inflation?
Nobody else, but they had already inflated. It was the adjustment for the inflation prior to that. There was too many dollars floating around, and we couldn't maintain it. So we declared a bankruptcy. We were out of gold. We had promised people that they could repatriate their dollar. Not Americans. You were denied that right in 1933. So that was another abuse. But up until then, a foreigner could. We got angry at de Gaulle because he knew what was coming. He was turning in millions of dollars and repatriating his gold at $35 an ounce. And finally, they ran out of gold. But the reason the gold standard broke down is we had so much paper out there. And guess what? We have trillions and trillions of dollars more now. So we're actually facing a greater crisis here in the next decade, I'm sure, for the adjustment that always comes. The markets are more powerful than the politicians and the bureaucrats, the banking system. The markets usually rule ultimately, although there's a lot of adjustments and a lot of shenanigans that go on in the meantime.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Appreciate you being here and traveling so far.
Thank you.
Thank you.